This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 690 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. Before getting into the 10 trends this week, I wanted to send another reminder about FanDuel Face-Off. FanDuel Face-Off is where you compete in quick, fun games against other real people for real cash. It has all sorts of games that you're familiar with, like Home Run Derby, Wheel of Fortune, puzzle and strategy games with more on the way. Contests are action-packed and last between 2 to 5 minutes. You can play on your couch, waiting in line, during a commercial break, wherever, and on your schedule. Plus, you can practice for free anytime. Whether it be head-to-head, multiplayer, or larger tournaments, FanDuel Face-Off has something for you. Plus, in most contests, you'll be matched against other players of similar skill levels, so you're never totally overmatched, even as a beginner. Face-Off is also tied to your FanDuel account and wallet, so you can easily use your daily fantasy funds or sportsbook winnings in the app. Visit FanDuel.com/faceoff or download the FanDuel Face-Off app in the Apple App Store today to get in the game. Age and location restrictions apply, void where prohibited. See FanDuel.com/faceoff-terms for terms and conditions. Trend 1 this week is that Michael Pittman has one 15-plus air yard target on the season. One. Matt Ryan has attempted 18 of those types of throws. Only Kirk Cousins has a lower deep ball rate this year than Matt Ryan. But Alec Pierce has 4 of those targets. Ashton Dulin has 6. Kylan Granson has 3. This has been a problem for Michael Pittman in fantasy football. He has a 23% target share per game rate, but he's ranked higher than wide receiver 27 once this year. And that came all the way back in week 1. The Colts need to get more aggressive for Michael Pittman to live up to his draft day expectation. Let's do a quick update on the Washington backfield now that Brian Robinson is back. With Brian Robinson back, Antonio Gibson saw a 33% snap share this past week. He's now seen his snap share drop each week this season, starting at 64% in week 1, going all the way down to 33% in week 5. So it's basically been cut in half. Naturally, his workload has taken a hit. This past week, he saw just 25% of the Commanders' running back rushes when his previous low was 50%. Brian Robinson was taking a lot of that work on the ground, while Gibson hit an 11% target share. This is an absolute mess. Hopefully, if you drafted Antonio Gibson, you were able to get out after week 2. A.J. Dillon saw his worst usage of the season in London. He played 31% of Green Bay's snaps when his previous season low was about 51%. And what's worse is that his target share has now dropped every single week of the season. He had a 17% target share in week 1, then a 12% one in week 2, and this past week, he didn't see a single target. I do expect the Packers to get him more involved than they did in London, but this is definitely a humongous problem for A.J. Dillon if this continues. David Montgomery got his role back. He returned from injury this past week, and he saw 72% of the team's snaps and 75% of the team's running back rushes. And he had a target share of 19%. Honestly, David Montgomery had amazing usage this past week. Naturally, that means that Khalil Herbert didn't see a lot of work. He had just 4 rush attempts and didn't see a single target. Now, we'll see if this continues, but it's not good news for any of us hoping that Herbert would get a decent-sized role even if Montgomery returned. Deontay Johnson hasn't finished a week this year ranked higher than wide receiver 22. So he has just one top 24 wide receiver performance in 5 games. That's a 20% rate of finishing as a wide receiver 2 or better. Last year, that rate was almost 69%. A big reason for this is touchdowns. The Steelers, through 5 weeks, have 2 passing touchdowns. That's the lowest number in football. So far this year, wide receivers have caught a touchdown for every 186 yards receiving. Based on that number, Johnson should have about 1.4 touchdowns, but he has 0. That 1.4 touchdown difference is the second largest in the league so far at wide receiver, behind only Nico Collins. These are just ways of saying that touchdowns matter a whole lot in fantasy football. And when the offensive environment is as poor as it's been in Pittsburgh, everyone suffers. Jerick McKinnon outsnapped Clyde Edwards-Helaire once again. On Monday night, McKinnon had a 53% snap share, CEH 43%. McKinnon has now outsnapped CEH in 3 of 5 games, and he tied with him in another. So Edwards-Helaire has outsnapped Jerick McKinnon in one single game this year. This is why it's been hard for me to declare CEH as some RB1 in fantasy football. He's a touchdown-reliant RB2. He's just in an environment where those touchdowns can come. But the Chiefs' backfield is very frustrating. It's one that's hard to deal with every week because Isaiah Pacheco is randomly in the lineup too. Trend 7 is that the Ravens have targeted their wide receivers on fewer than 44% of their targeted throws this year. For some context, the league average aside from Baltimore is over 60%. Since 2011, we've only seen this low of a wide receiver target share 5 times, but one of those times was the 2019 Baltimore Ravens. So this could very well maintain, because it's not like the personnel there screams you got to throw to the wide receivers. Now, I know I talked about Rachaad White on last week's 15 Transactions episode, but the usage continued into Week 5. He played almost 40% of Tampa Bay's snaps. He didn't have the same backfield rush share as he did in Week 4, and Leonard Fournette had a huge receiving day with a 22% target share. But White actually ran just 7 fewer routes than Leonard Fournette this past week. According to PFF, Fournette was at 29, White was at 22. In Week 4, that difference was 25-17. So it was pretty similar. It's just that Brady ended up targeting Fournette more against the Falcons. Fournette should be fine just given the offense and Brady's trust in him. But my stance has definitely not changed on Rachaad White being number 1, a good handcuff, and number 2, a potential flex play during bye weeks. If anything, it was just reinforced this past week. DeVonta Smith posted a goose egg in Week 1 on just a 14% target share. Since then, he's averaged a target share per game of nearly 27%, and he's posted over 17 PPR points per game. During this stretch of 4 games, Smith has a higher target share mark than A.J. Brown. He's averaging 4 more PPR points per game. I think there's definitely an anchoring bias going on with Smith after Week 1. People remember that terrible game, and they just assume that he's not that great of a fantasy asset. But he's been really, really good over the last month. Now, the last trend this week is about quarterback scoring, one of my favorite topics in fantasy football. If you felt like your quarterback situation has been rough this year, you're not alone. In a 12-team league, 2/3 of your league is probably feeling that exact same way. Or people who don't have Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Patrick Mahomes. Those 4 quarterbacks as a cluster are giving you a more significant edge at quarterback than what we've seen in modern fantasy football history. Those top 4 quarterbacks are averaging 26.4 points per game. That's over 2 points higher than any other season over the last 5 years when looking at that bucket, when looking at top 4 quarterbacks. But then compare that to QB5 to QB12. Look at that bucket. And in that bucket, quarterbacks are averaging 18.5 points per game. In other words, the top 4 quarterbacks right now are scoring nearly 8 more points per game than the next 8 on average. That is by far the biggest difference that we've seen over the last 5 years. Like by far. Last year, the difference between top 4 quarterbacks to the QB5 to 12 was 2.3 points per game. Most seasons, it's between 2 and 4 points. This year, it's 8. Now, I used an arbitrary cutoff there to make a point, because we know this year we have these 4 quarterbacks who are absolutely crushing it. That's where a huge drop-off exists. But I'm getting questions from people every single week about the quarterback position and their frustration with that position. And those frustrations are literally the majority. As long as these quarterbacks keep playing out of their minds, we're going to see a gap. And if you don't have those quarterbacks, you're going to naturally suffer. Now, my guess is that that gap naturally shrinks as the season moves forward, but there's no doubt that those players will be giving you some sort of edge here in 2022. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Remember to check out lateround.com and everything going on over there. Otherwise, I will catch you tomorrow with the Weekly Sleeper Show.